So yeah, so yes, we're going to be talking first a little bit about the details involved with Lexember, either as a reminder or maybe as a reminder for the first time. And then I'll talk a little bit about the thought process that went into my daily invention of Lexember words, and then we'll hopefully finish up with some decent amount of time for questions, though I'm not completely promising that there'll be a lot of time at the end. So the first Lexember was last December. This was, I'd like to say the first annual one, but that might be putting the ox before the cart. I did not invent this. This was invented by Pete Blackley, I think is how you say his last name, and Mia Soderquist, and they were doing it to combat egregious lexical gaps. And I've heard some discussion today that all conlangs have them, so this is a useful thing. The idea with the Lexember words would that they be posted to social media. The original idea was to post it to Twitter. I was not involved with that because I do not tweet. You could also post it to Google Plus and other areas, and in particular, I posted mine both to Google Plus and then as status updates on Facebook. And so this ends up, at least for me and maybe for other people, a phenomenon similar to this status a day meme of like 30 days of thankful. It also has some resemblance with National Novel Writing Month. Both these things incidentally occurred in November, so I think following them up with something in December sort of made a certain amount of sense. So I decided to participate with my language scare. I will readily admit my involvement was quite happenstance. I just saw about it on Facebook on December 1st. If I hadn't gone on Facebook on December 1st, I would not be giving this talk. And it was entirely because David had posted something about it on Facebook. If he hadn't done that, then you'd be listening to me blather about something else. And what also helped was the first weekend of December was light on the grading. If that wasn't the case, I wouldn't have started it either. But I did think that Lexember was interesting for a number of reasons. One was its structure. So you were to invent a word a day for a month. So the one word made it feasible to me. Didn't have to set the bar that high. It was regimented every day, and it was finite. If it was really a horrendous experience, it would be over by the end of the month. I was also excited about the expansion possibilities. So even starting with around 1,000 for 50, which maybe is a decent amount, though I'm sure that it's small by some of your standards. Adding 31 more words would certainly help the cause. Maybe I should really have done like Lexember for a whole year, and then I really have something more to show for myself. But I did think that it was helpful to have an activity to frame lexical expansion. Like John said earlier, I think when talking about Jesse's talk, having some sort of activity that prompts you to create new vocabulary is very helpful, because one doesn't just sort of sit around saying like, I need a word for prefix today or something like that. So I was very glad to have some activity to help me along. I admit also that I was intrigued to use social media. I guess I had a bit of envy of some of my friends that were doing like 30 days of thankful and thought, well, I should do this sometime just to see what it's like. And I've also been fiddling around with some morphological constructions that I'll get to eventually, and so this actually ended up being a useful way to test them out. So, skipping a little bit to the end, I have the whole collection of Lexember words actually over 3 different slides, just so you can see a little bit what scare looks like, what sort of meanings I chose, that sort of thing. It's not important that you quickly memorize all the different words, because there will not be a test at the end of my talk. Just to add some things to the results. So the original goal was just to fill some lexical gaps, but I found it difficult to spy gaps easily on a daily basis. I mean, it's much easier to look up what you have than what you don't have. So I got into the habit of inventing what I knew, which is sort of like writing what you know, except for Lexember. So the word for a given day typically had something to do with that day. Sometimes it was rather personal, other times it was a little more broad. So just to give you an example, on December 23rd, the day was Yondo, which one of the possible translations of it is grievance. And this was in honor of Festivus, which is a faux holiday from the TV sitcom Seinfeld. It's like an anti-Christmas, and one of the customs of Festivus is to, in fact, air grievances. So I thought, why not create a word for Festivus? So I did. One of the unexpected things that I discovered with this whole Lexember event was that it was an interesting way to engage others with my language, whether they are conlangers, whether they're linguists, or whether they fall into the dreaded other category, like most of my family members, in fact. And I did feel that as linguistic items go, single words are fairly relatable, even if you don't have linguistic background. If you can read things on Facebook, you can relate to words, so that was a plus. I think that some people might have been drawn into the intrigue of what I was doing for a given day. I know in the latter part of the month, when I was hanging out with family, there was a fair amount of discussion about what are you going to do for this day, how does that relate to this day, so they were interested. I've never been particularly shy about admitting that I conlang, and so lots of my friends were aware that I did this, and I think some of them appreciated the chance to see the language in action, because they never had done that before. And while I didn't do any comprehensive survey, it did seem that the likes and comments I got throughout the month suggested that friends found the whole thing interesting to follow. I even got some suggestions for improvements, which I really wasn't expecting. So originally I actually wasn't including IP transcriptions in my Facebook post, because I figured, who really cares? But one of my friends who is IK knowledgeable suggested I put them, so I retroactively added them, and then for the rest of the month included them as well. Some people also commented about the word's meanings, and I did get a small refinement of some of the senses of some of the words, which I also appreciated, because I think sometimes I'm not completely careful as to exactly which senses I'm paying attention to, so that was good to have. So it did turn out, once Lexember got going, that each day the word invention wasn't something that I just whipped out in 5 minutes, but turned into a lengthy and research-intensive endeavor, sometimes taking up a couple of hours even, though when you're on winter break, it's like party, let's do some research, or maybe I'm just a super nerd like that. But why was I doing that other than to nerd it up? Well, it's because I belong to this sort of realist school of conlanging that seeks to make conlangs as natural as possible, so I'm always asking myself, how do natural languages do particular things? And in this case, the question is, how do natlangs create new words? And I think there are three broad possibilities that I think other people have actually alluded to. One I call conveniently coin, which involves reworking pre-existing resources, be they morphological or phonological, to make a new word. Borrow is good old use someone else's word, or maybe steal someone else's word. And then there is, of course, the option of extend, adding new meaning to an existing word. When thinking about these different options for scare for Lexember, I wasn't very excited about applying extend, mostly because there aren't that many words in scare to begin with, so I did this a ton. A, I wouldn't be getting new words, and B, I get this pigeon-like lexicon. And it is true of pigeons that they typically have few words with rather large semantic ranges, and that was certainly not the end product I was going for, so that was out. Borrowing was unappealing due to my purist feelings about scare. I'm a little afraid to bring this up because it sort of reveals like a prescriptive undertone to my descriptive veneer, but I do have this thought that scare should be full of scare words, though I'm actually aware that borrowing is quite common in the world of languages. I don't think you ever find a pure lexicon anywhere, and I should probably work on overcoming my purist feelings and adding some borrowings at some point in the future if I'm really committed to this whole realism business. So coin ends up being the best option for me, though I wondered a little bit if it wasn't self-fulfilling, because I like morphology a lot anyway, so why not do the thing that involves morphology? So, if you go the coining route, there are still choices to be made because the coining style tends to correlate with the overall morphological type. And so with isolating languages, you mostly see compounding if you see anything. I personally am not one of these people that actually believes that languages like Chinese and Vietnamese have no morphology period, but there are probably some people in this world that believe that. And if you go sort of further up the morphological typology, you're likely to get more affixes and or more compounding with the polysynthetic language is going sort of wild with both of those different things. So independently scare is synthetic, so it was the moderate path that I ended up following, though I try and follow the moderate path with a lot of things in life. So with coining, you get a collection of morphologically complex words, and it's pretty clear that all languages have some mix of morphologically simple and morphologically complex words. But the question is, what proportion are they in, and in particular, what meanings are encoded by what types of words, and vice versa. I think actually for producing words for Lexember, thinking about which meaning will be encoded in which way, or which is more likely to be encoded in which way, was actually the more useful way to frame the question. So in trying to think about how you might do this, one solution, or I suppose a better word might be strategy, would be to use Conlinger's intuition. And this has been the traditional way that I have pursued the development of the scare lexicon. But it is, I realize, possibly troublesome. So take, for instance, a long-time word, though I don't know why I invented this word in the first place. There's a word that is translated as decorate, and that is pastatum. And this is just a opaque stem that means decorate. And this is certainly something you could do. English does this a lot because English has borrowed from lots of different languages. And what does your average English speaker know about the morphological history of the Romance languages? Not much, unless they learned about it in school. But you do know in English that decorate seems to be related to decor. At least this is some relationship, perhaps more etymological than synchronic morphology. But this does suggest that maybe this concept is actually better done with a morphologically complex word. And so a question that at least I ask myself is, having an opaque stem for this concept very natural language-like? And this was actually generally what I was thinking. Another possible solution is to select a small number of basic concepts and derive everything else. So here comes the obligatory bashing of Esperanto part. So it does seem that this solution is chosen by a fair number of Oxlangs, and I believe, though I don't know for certain, that this is due to a belief that this is easy to learn. I don't know if anyone's actually researched whether this is easy to learn or not, but they think it is. So Esperanto has interesting pairs. So you have a base that means high and is rather romancy, and there is a derived word that means low, and it is the high word with mal prefixed in front of it, so it's literally like non-high. Similarly, you have lumo, meaning light, and to get darkness, you have non-light, or mallumo. And then, of course, there is the example that my colleague down the hall really likes, so I felt compelled to include it. There is a base trinky, meaning drink. That's a good old German borrowing for Esperanto, and the word for urinate is maltrinky, to dis-drink. And while this is a handy way of making new vocabulary items, there is this question: how realistic is it? Do any natural languages have urinate as a derived word with the base from drink? I'm suspicious that none do, but I would be impressed to discover if there was one that worked in this Esperanto-y way. So, using pure intuition or deciding to go the let's derive everything route seems to be prone to yielding some unnatural results. This is not to say that it's always unnatural, but sometimes it seems to get there. And so I will ask myself again, how might we more rigorously figure out which words are more likely to be simplex or complex? And I think some work on lexical categorization might be of some help. So if you look up here, you can see a beautiful lexical relation network. Some people call this a taxonomy of the wonderful world of cola drinks. I had to look on Wikipedia to see that RC Cola still existed and had not gone out of business. This particular thing, type of data structure organizes words or expressions by the kind of relation, and actually you have the lower nodes that are subtypes or kinds of the higher nodes. So Diet Coke is a kind of Coke, which in turn is a kind of cola drink. That's how you need to understand these diagrams. So again, the slide or the diagram is still up on the slide, but if you look at this middle line that includes Coke and RC Cola and Dr. Pepper and Pepsi, you might notice that these have the most basic names. They're all much more prone to just being simple linguistic terms, and they are, I think, conceptually simpler, and there is some psychological research to suggest at least that this area is more conceptually simple. I don't think the research actually looked at cola drinks in particular, but these are what are known as basic level categories, and then you have lines above and below them that seem to have more complex names. You have nearly all compounds and are more conceptually complex. These are what I'll refer to as non-basic level categories, though they do actually have slightly different names amongst people that think about this a fair amount. So it does seem that the basic, non-basic divide correlates roughly with the morphological simple versus complex divide, and so that suggests a general mode for creation. If you can identify what the basic level category concepts are, you can make them morphologically simple, and then the non-basic ones will be morphologically complex. And this just reduces to figure out what's basic. So this, I think, is an idea with some merit, but I don't think it's necessarily the solution because there are some issues with it. One that at least struck me is, are basic level categories always equivalent across different conceptual domains? Perhaps more down my alley was this question of whether do all languages organize their conceptual domains in the same fashion. There also are other relationships besides kind of. For some things, I think part of is a fairly important relationship, and it's not at least immediately obvious what you do to deal with it. I don't think these questions are particularly easy to answer in general, and more to the point, they might get in the way of actual conlanging. If you've gone through like December 1st through 9th, but then you start pondering these questions, you might discover that when you have a good solution, Lexember has been over for 4 months, and so how might you attack these problems actually without completely solving them? And so an idea that came to me was to use Wiktionary. This is a site that is a companion to Wikipedia and is a collection of free online user-created multilingual dictionaries. Each one could be considered a Wiktionary in and of itself. So you have different Wiktionaries that are written in different description languages, but one of the neat properties of Wiktionary is that each Wiktionary is not confined to the description language's words. So normal paper dictionaries, you open them up and they'll at best have words from 2 languages, maybe 3 if you have a special trilingual dictionary, most often just 1, but the English Wiktionary, for instance, contains information about French and Latin and Russian and Chinese and even Navajo. I enjoy the Navajo things when you can find them. I went searching to see if there was an ABO term for first base recently and was disappointed that that term was not on the English Wiktionary. But I think it exists. So I think this site is fun for any language lover. So if you haven't visited before, you should at some point. So some benefits that I identified in using Wiktionary is that it actually gets at a question that is important to me: how do actual NatLangs do it? It, in fact, gives you raw data in lots of different natural languages, and that's really what I think is the most important thing for me to see. It could also help indirectly answer this question of whether all languages organize their conceptual domains in the same fashion, and it might allow me to either indirectly answer or to just bypass some of the other issues that I noticed about basic level categories. So I thought it was like win-win-win. So there are two key parts to Wiktionary entries for me. One is the etymological information about a given word. This is useful because it actually ends up giving you morphological information about the word. And actually, as I told my intro students many times this semester, the difference between morphology and etymology is considerably less than the terms might indicate. The other thing that's nice about Wiktionary is you get these translations into hopefully a lot of different languages. Some of them are kind of small, for a given sense of a word. So they actually go sense by sense. They don't just translate single words. So there's lots of fun to be had. And this, I think, is useful because it gives an accessible means to look at the variation across languages instead of like tearing out the Turkish dictionary and the Latin dictionary and the Basque dictionary and looking up words. You can just look them all up and they're right there in front of you. So this works out well. And in particular, I found that I was using the etymology and translation information to answer questions like, should this word be morphologically complex or simple? If it's complex, what are some possible bases for the word? And if it's complex, what are some possible affixes that languages choose to relate the base and the derived meaning? Lest I sound too rah, Wikipedia is the best. There are some drawbacks, of course. So the translations are heavily biased towards the major languages of the world. And if you want to learn like how you does something, you're more or less out of luck. You're also confronted by the fact that some entries lack etymological information, so many etymological searches turn into dead ends. And then finally, the languages are not all equal, and in fact, they can vary significantly in quality, and you might have to be a bit of an expert in a given language to actually understand what's going on. So you have to have good multilingual chops if you're trying to do the different cross-linguistic translation. So let's consider example launch. There we go.
That's a bunch of tabs.
Oh.
You can close it.
Facebook.
So, here we are at celebration, which was one of the words that I looked at. And when I scroll down here, why is your phone different than mine?
You talk, I'll scroll.
So, celebration, you'll notice has a pronunciation, no etymological information, which is kind of too bad. So you're left to look at either a related term or look at some of the translations. That's actually look at the translations of formal performance of a rite, and you see that there is a collection of different languages here. It's not quite as massive as you get with other language or other words, but hey, it's something. So let's see, what should we do? Why don't we just explore this a little bit and look at a particular non-Indo-European word to see what interesting things you might find. So you notice there is a Swahili word, and let's see what it says. So you get Swahili, so this is a Swahili word in the English dictionary, and the word is there and a definition is given, but sadly not much else is given. There is this blurb about how it was created from the Swahili dictionary, and so you might think, well, maybe you can find something interesting there. So we can check it out. And lo and behold, we discover that, it's in Swahili. Swahili.
Translate it.
Unfortunately, Google Translate reads Swahili, and when I sent this particular definition through, I got exactly what we see here. A collection of something fun to celebrate. Which,
What? What?
oh,
What is it?
so it's even worse if you ask the page to translate it. So,
To celebrate.
yeah, I've got a collection of something fun to celebrate, but this is even worse.
What is it? What's under what?
Jumbo. Yes, there goes the jumbo.
So, there's obviously lots of opportunity for hilarity with these, but it's kind of a bit of a dead end. So let's go back and to celebration and pursue.
IRC says celebrate has etymology.
Yes. So I was coming to celebrate. So click on celebrate. And you go, and lo and behold, there is an etymology provided. And in fact, you see that the original base, in Latin anyway, was a adjective that meant something like crowded or populous or frequented, and actually, as you can see the derivation, it was, the adjective was verbed into something that means like maybe to frequent, and then the actual English word comes from the good old past participle of this verb. So it in fact is morphologically complex in Latin, and you get one idea of a possible base for which you could derive celebration, something having to do with crowdedness or population. Let's go back and explore another kind of avenue that I was exploring. So go back to celebrate. And you can also, I also was checking out synonyms, so I checked out observance. And you go to observance, and there's no etymological information. There's not a whole lot of other things there. There are a couple translations, though, if you open, you see that there is a Czech translation, a French translation, and an Irish translation, which sounds like the beginning of some bad joke.
Irish.
But if you click on the Irish translation, just for kicks, you go and see that there's a whole bunch of different senses. You'll notice observant is the fifth one, which suggests that we might be drifting from our semantic target, which might be the sign of something else going awry. But you will note that this form is a verbal noun of some Irish verb, which is, I think, to a certain extent, significant. So, I think our fun with Wiktionary is come to an end.
Okay, you good?
So, some lessons from the celebration search, which admittedly might not be the best search possibility, but hopefully it was at least mildly entertaining. We actually did not come up with a very great picture of the possible bases cross-linguistically for this word. We did come up with what English chose, but there's lots of other languages besides English. But something that was maybe a little more useful is that there was a slight propensity for treating celebration as some sort of action nominalization. And by that I mean some sort of deverbal noun that refers to the name of the event denoted by the original verb. And this is significant because one of the big things that I have done with Scare is have a bunch of different nominalization options, inspired originally by the discussion in describing morphosyntax, though I do not have quite as many nominalizations as there are mentioned in that book, because I think cross-linguistically some of them are in fact a bit rare. But just as a reminder, nominalizations create new verbs or new nouns from verbs, and they semantically refer either to the situation, sort of the event itself, or to a particular participant in that situation. And in fact, there are several in Scare. So the action nominalization, as I have glossed it, morphologically is this E prefix. There is some allomorphy in general, though you don't see it in the example. So this refers to the name of an event denoted by the verb. And so you can see some examples with various verbs, and you'll notice that some of the English ones are zero derived, others of them are formed with suffixes, but they're all done with the same prefix in Scare. Another part of the nominalization menagerie is the instrument product nominalization, which is, I somewhat arbitrarily decide the T prefix. There is a fair amount of allomorphy with this, and you can see some of it there in the examples, but this refers either to an instrument characteristically involved with the verb or a product resulting from the event of the verb. And I think in terms of the rough semantics, celebration is in principle compatible with either nominalization pattern. It could be viewed as the name for an event of celebrating, or it could be viewed as the product of the verb celebrate. And in fact, this is a general property of many English nominalizations, that they have this ambiguity between sort of an event reading and a result reading, and there is a small cottage literature on this whole phenomenon. But the cross-linguistic data, which I admit was not a ton, seemed to suggest that celebration was more commonly encoded by a meaning closer to the action nominalization one in Scare, and so I felt that that was the construction that seemed to be the best way to go with this meaning. If you think about the base, you'll remember that our foray into Wiktionary was actually not very inspirational, but luckily I found some inspiration elsewhere. So I found I already had a base that I glossed as observe or celebrate. And since there were other things to get done on December 22nd, I said, screw it, I'm going to just use this as the base. So I essentially used Wiktionary to help me out with which morphological construction I chose, and I went with a ready-made base. So to wrap up, I do think Lexember is fun, and I do encourage people to participate in the future when hopefully the second annual Lexember will be happening. I do want to encourage you to participate, even if you think that, well, this whole thing that Doug did was pretty complicated, and I don't want to waste a ton of time on Wiktionary. I'm willing to bet you could make it fun some other way. My definition of fun may vary from yours. I think that's pretty evident. And you might discover that this is a useful way to engage more people in your language, because this was the pleasant side effect that I didn't anticipate would happen. In thinking about the structure of the lexicon, I did come up with the clever takeoff Einstein. The lexicon may be difficult, but it's not mean. So it is viewed as this tricky area for both language learners and, I think, theoretical linguists. But I think there are patterns to be found, especially with how certain meanings are encoded across languages. But something you don't need to do is try and intuit the structure of the lexicon alone. Using actual natural languages as your guide might be actually the path of lesser resistance. And then finally, I hope to have at least given you a taste for the idea that Wiktionary can be a useful tool for exploring lexical differences between languages. And I hope our little study in celebration gave you a feel for what it was like on those cold December days as I was screwing around with Wiktionary. But you should feel free to alter my methods as you see fit, and if you alter them for the better, you should let me know, because maybe I've been doing it wrong. So, thanks, and I'm happy to take your questions.
No, it's dead.
Okay, let me borrow this for a second.
It is
Well,
dead.
I don't think I can.
Try.
To the people,
Try the.
well, I don't know how to turn it on.
I know how to turn it on.
Okay. We're going to try to turn this mic on. Before that, we're just going to take questions because we don't have a lot of time, and Doug's going to have the mic.
I have a single word question. WordNet.
Yes.
What do you think of that?
WordNet and some of the other computational resources out there are quite fantastic. There's also a subset of WordNet called VerbNet that I enjoy. Usually that helps me double check the data roles or the thematic roles for particular verbs that I put on tests. I like to have independent confirmation that I'm just not making up crap. Though, as a professor, I guess I could.
Time-honored tradition.
Okay, so I'm going to take the mic around and just stand in front of
Try standing on the other side.
This side?
Yeah.
That side.
All right.
A couple of points, letter correction. Mulching is a joke word. The normal Esperanto word is visi or podini. Also, I found the Wikipedia articles on animal species, genera, families, and so forth to be helpful. Going up and down those taxonomic trees and figuring out how general or specific I want my word for that, for those kind of animals to be. How many species do I want to include in this word, or don't. I generally wind up pointing at the genera or family level.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if the biologists are ahead of the linguists in their taxonomic abilities.
This isn't much a question as another resource to just throw out there. There are, if you look around, there are some books on, they're actually about learning languages, but they talk about word construction. I've read a great one called Roots of the Russian Language, and it goes through and basically takes roots and then shows you all of the different things they derive from those roots and kind of how they did it. And it's a it's an awesome way to look at it and get ideas for how you might want to derive something and what sort of connected roots there might be. And I know it exists for other things. I've got similar ones in these highly out-of-date Latin and ancient Greek grammars that have a section on that as well.
Yeah, I consulted my Latin dictionary and my Latin and Greek grammars several times during this occasion. It's actually a bit of a myth to say that I was consulting Wiktionary alone.
Just two comments. One, a great resource for understanding the whole basic level or base level categories. Basic level categories is Lakoff's Women and Fire and Dangerous Things. That's my source for Ithquil vocabulary. It came from, it was inspired by that base level idea that he talks about. So I'm glad to see that SCARE also takes that into consideration. The other thing I wanted to say was on word formation, when you mentioned that the 3 ways of creating new words and that borrowing was not an option because you like SCARE words to be SCARE words, it reminded me very much of the way Icelandic creates new words. This actually comes from one of the slides I didn't get to in my own presentation earlier today. Icelandic does something that is not very common in the world's languages. They do what's called phonosemantic matching. So they take a borrowing from another language, but they try to camouflage it as a native Icelandic word. And as an example, the word for parrot in Icelandic was borrowed from the Danish word. I can't read it without the Danish word is papagayo, which just means parrot, kind of like papagayo in Spanish. Well, Icelandic needed a word for parrot, so they borrowed that, but then camouflaged it as pafagaukur, which is Icelandic pafa, meaning pope, the pope, and the word gaukur, meaning, which is Icelandic for cuckoo. So the Icelandic word for parrot is literally Pope's cuckoo, but it was borrowed from Danish, then camouflaged. And so this is another example. Other example is
Telephone, another example of this sort of thing. Will they like use the word for amber?
it might be Icelandic does this a lot. I didn't come across that as a particular example. This occurs also in languages, the Dutch, Swedish, and German words for hammock. All 3 languages borrowed the Spanish word hamaca, which back then still had the H pronounced hamaca, which they all then reinterpreted, German hangemata, Dutch hangmat, and Swedish hangmatta, all literally meaning hanging mat. so there's phonosemantic matching is a 4th way
to sort of like folk etymology.
It's a type of folk etymology is what it essentially is. So.
That is very, so when does the Welsh do that?
Jennifer on IRC mentions Locarimo or Nacarimo, which is November. Challenge yourself to make a 200-word original document in 1 month in your conlang.
So maybe that should be sort of the precursor to Lexember, or
Shouldn't it be the other way around?
post-cursor.
Make the words first, then make your document?
Yeah.
Oh, it's not a question, sorry. For people who have Macs, the Mac ships with a round break dictionary that a lot of people don't know about because it's not in the doc when you originally get it. So it has etymologies in there actually. So it's super easy to look up stuff in it. Yeah, it has like look up technology, for example, and take you all back to the original Greek roots and whatnot. So if you didn't know you have that and you have a relatively new Mac, you do. I think it's probably originally the utility dictionary. And it has Japanese, and it's a complete Japanese too, which is useful for me, not to everybody, but they do Japanese English, and you sometimes find very interesting things. by, even if you don't read Japanese, going to the Japanese definition, because then they have English there, and you can find all these kind of odd relationships that you can track back into English and check there. And the source is built into that.
Well, thank you very much, Doug.
Oh.